In the autumn of 1812, the people of Alton, Illinois, welcomed a family they believed had been sent from God himself. The Hargroves, dressed in clean black coats and speaking with the poise of educated Easterners, arrived in a town where most homes were still being built from raw timber, and where education was often left to the Bible and the seasons. They spoke of purpose, of discipline, of salvation through knowledge, and above all, they promised a gift, a school. "We'll raise your sons and daughters as if they were our own," said Mr. Jeremiah Hargrove, a tall man with silvering hair, a sharp voice, and an unsettling calmness behind his eyes. His wife, Margaret, stood beside him with her 10 children, quiet, straight-backed, and unusually obedient for their age. The offer was irresistible. The town lacked teachers, and most children worked the fields rather than learn their letters. So when the Hargroves offered to build a boarding academy for gifted rural children, using their own savings, no one questioned their motives. They were lauded in church, offered land at a discount, and celebrated in sermons as Christian saviors sent to civilize the frontier. Construction of the Hargrove Academy began before the first snowfall, and by spring, the school stood complete, a 2-story wooden structure nestled between rolling prairies and dense woods. A bell tower rose above the roof. White paint gleamed in the sun. Crosses adorned the windows. It looked like a sanctuary. The first students enrolled quickly. 12 children from Alton, and several more from nearby towns like Edwardsville and Belleville. Some came by wagon from as far as Missouri and Indiana. The tuition was minimal, the standard strict, and the promise simple. The Hargroves would provide food, lodging, discipline, and education. The children would return home better than they came. For a while, it seemed perfect. Letters came home filled with praise. "I learned how to read scripture," one boy wrote. "We rise at dawn, pray, and study all day," said another. Parents boasted of their children's improvement in church. Some even said their boys and girls seemed more obedient when they visited home for the holidays. But by the second year, things began to change. Some families reported long gaps between letters. A few never received any at all. When they wrote back, they were told by the Hargroves that their child had either lost interest in writing, or was ill, or too busy with studies. Always polite, always vague. More unsettling was how often new children were enrolled, yet were never seen again in the town. The school never had more than 20 students at a time, but over 2 years, more than 60 families had sent their children there. Where were they all going? Mrs. Eleanor Reed, a widowed mother of 1, had a bad feeling. Her son Thomas, 12 years old and prone to asthma, had written home every week after enrollment, until he suddenly stopped. It had been 2 months now. Her letters went unanswered. When she visited the academy one cold December afternoon, she expected smiles and reassurance. Instead, she was met with silence. The school building looked quiet. Too quiet. No children's laughter. No recitations or hymnals from the classroom. She knocked. No answer. She circled the building, calling for Thomas. It was then she noticed a foul stench behind the structure, near the root cellar door, left slightly ajar. Inside was darkness. The first thing she saw were chains, bolted into the stone foundation. Then what looked like a bench, no, a surgical table, rusted and stained. Shelves stacked with medical tools, far too advanced for a simple rural school. Vials, knives, leather straps. On the floor lay a torn shirt she recognized as her son's. Mrs. Reed screamed and ran, sprinting back to town, her heart racing with terror. She reached the sheriff before sundown. He gathered 6 men and returned with her. But it was too late. The schoolhouse was burning. Flames licked the sky, consuming the entire structure. The bell tower collapsed in a shower of embers. By morning, nothing remained but ash and bones. The Hargroves were gone, and the mystery of what truly happened at the Hargrove Academy had only just begun. The fire at the Hargrove Academy wasn't just a tragedy. It was a smokescreen. By the time the sheriff and his men returned with Mrs. Reed to confront the Hargroves and search the school, every trace of truth had gone up in flames. It was as if someone had known they were coming. As townsfolk gathered in stunned silence the next morning, the charred schoolhouse, still smoldering, A chilling realization settled over them. Not only were the Hargroves missing, but so were the remaining students. No survivors. No bodies identified. No Hargrove children. Nothing left but ashes and scorched earth. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the Hargroves had perished in the fire. Others insisted they'd fled into the wilderness overnight, using the fire as cover. But no one saw them leave. No one saw any wagons. The roads were muddy from recent rain. There should have been tracks. There weren't. Sheriff Abner Klein, a grizzled war veteran with more field scars than patience, launched an investigation. But he was fighting more than just smoke and suspicion. The academy was located just beyond county lines, complicating jurisdiction. And worse, nobody wanted to believe what Mrs. Reed claimed to have seen. Torture tables? Chains? Surgical knives? Some muttered. Surely she was overwhelmed by grief. Hallucinating. Hysterical. Others took a darker stance. Why would a God-fearing family do something so horrific? Jeremiah Hargrove spoke at the revival. Margaret ran the prayer circles. Their eldest daughter played the organ at church. But those who knew Mrs. Reed well, those who had seen the pure terror in her eyes, believed her. Sheriff Klein returned to the burned ruins several times. He and his deputies sifted through the blackened remains. They found what could have been bone fragments, but no skulls, no identifiable remains, nothing to tie any discovery to the missing children. What they did find, buried under a warped floorboard near the cellar, was a brass journal clasp and a metal identification tag etched with the initials T.R. Thomas Reed. The sheriff sent word to Springfield, asking for state assistance. Weeks passed. Nothing came. Officials said they'd investigate, but none arrived. It was as if someone, somewhere, didn't want the story to spread. Then came the strangest twist of all. 1 month after the fire, a trapper named Micah Tully stumbled into Alton with a wooden crate he had pulled from the Mississippi River, miles downstream. Inside were waterlogged papers, partially burned and sealed in wax. They appeared to be student records, ledgers of names, ages, hometowns, and notes beside them. Sheriff Klein spent days drying and deciphering the contents. What he found shocked him. Some names had large red XS marked beside them. Others were listed as complete or cleansed. And at the bottom of several pages were diagrams, human anatomy, crude surgical notations, and coded language no one could fully interpret. It wasn't just a school. It was something else. A month after that, a second crate washed ashore, this one near St. Louis. Inside were preserved organs in glass jars. Each jar had initials scratched into the lid. T.R. J.H. L.M. At least 6 jars. At least 6 children. The mayor of Alton, eager to protect the town's reputation, declared the entire affair a tragic accident and closed the case. He claimed the crates were hoaxes, that the river was full of junk, and anyone could have planted such things to stir fear. But Sheriff Klein didn't buy it. He quietly contacted a journalist he trusted in Chicago, hoping to get the story published in a broader newspaper. The journalist agreed and promised a feature. 3 days later, he was dead, found face down in the Illinois River, ruled an accident. And, just like that, the investigation was silenced. But the whispers continued. People in nearby towns began talking about children who never came home. Families who stopped asking questions. Private tuition, they said. The school was selective. What they didn't say was that most of those children had no graves. And deep in the woods where the Hargrove Academy once stood, strange figures were seen from time to time, cloaked, unmoving, just beyond torchlight. Those who dared approach never found anyone. Only footprints. Only silence. Only the faint ringing of a bell that no longer existed. And so, the townsfolk buried their fears and the ashes together, pretending it had all been a horrible mistake. But something had begun. Something far worse than they realized. And as the town of Alton returned to its routines, it would take another 10 years, and another child's disappearance, for the nightmare to rise again. 10 years had passed since the Hargrove Academy burned to the ground, and still, no one dared rebuild on that cursed land. The trees had reclaimed the scorched clearing, vines choking the skeletons of old stone foundations. Locals avoided the road near the Academy ruins, even during daylight. They said animals wouldn't go near it, that compasses spun in circles near the site, and some swore that on windless nights you could still hear a school bell ringing, though no school had stood there in a decade. The town of Alton had moved on, at least on the surface. New families moved in. Old ones moved out. And yet, whispers of the Hargrove name still clung to the corners of barrooms, church pews, and grandmothers' rocking chairs. Especially after the child vanished. It began innocently enough. In May of 1822, little Elsie Garver, age 9, was last seen walking home from her cousin's house just past dusk. She had taken the same route 100 times. It was barely a half-mile. But she never arrived. At first, no one panicked. It was springtime. Maybe she stopped to pick flowers. Maybe she fell asleep in a meadow. But the search turned up nothing. No shoes. No footprints. No torn dress hem. It was like the earth had swallowed her whole. Sheriff Klein, older now, limping from a war wound that never healed right, felt that familiar chill again. He knew. Deep down, he knew this wasn't random. The girl's parents were inconsolable. Her mother collapsed from grief. Her father spent weeks combing the countryside, screaming Elsie's name into the trees. It was only when he ventured near the edge of the old Hargrove land that he saw something that broke him. A doll. Elsie's doll, hand-stitched with a patch over one eye, caught high in the branches of a tree on the border of the cursed property. No child could have thrown it that high. Someone or something placed it there. Sheriff Klein returned to the Hargrove grounds for the first time in a decade, accompanied by 2 new deputies. The trees were thicker and the air felt wrong. Heavy. It wasn't just decay. It was like stepping into a memory you didn't want. They found the old cellar door, warped, covered in moss, but still intact. Klein opened it with a crowbar, expecting old stone and rot. What he found was far worse. The cellar had been dug deeper, extended. The walls were lined with wooden beams that weren't 10 years old. Fresh footprints littered the dirt floor, and at the far end of the tunnel was something he couldn't explain. A makeshift altar, stained dark. Bones, small and arranged like symbols, circled its base. And pinned to the back wall, barely hanging by rusted nails, was a drawing. A child's drawing. Of a girl, holding a doll, with a patch over one eye. Klein stepped back, sick to his stomach. He whispered, "She was here." He ordered the cellar sealed immediately and sent word to the governor's office in Springfield. Again, just like 10 years ago, no help came. But this time, Klein wasn't alone. A young journalist from St. Louis named Clara Monroe, new to the city and hungry for stories, had heard the whispers. She came to Alton uninvited, but determined. When she met with Klein, she didn't dismiss him. She listened. "What if," she said quietly, "the Hargroves never left?" Klein frowned. "We searched everywhere. They're either dead or long gone." But Clara opened her notebook and showed him something that made his blood run cold. A recent article, 3 towns over. A new boarding school had opened under the name New Dawn Seminary. The headmistress? A woman named Margaret Harrow. Hargrove. The photo accompanying the article was grainy, but unmistakable. The same cold eyes. The same rigid posture. And in the background of the school's grand staircase hung an antique bell. It looked exactly like the one from Hargrove Academy. "I think they moved their operation," Clara whispered. "Changed names. Moved counties. They've been doing this for years. Possibly even longer than we know." Klein sat back, stunned. The fire hadn't ended anything. It had just bought the Hargroves time. He looked again at the cellar drawing, at the altar, at the doll in the bag beside his desk. And he knew Elsie's fate wasn't unique. They were back, and they were taking children again. But this time, the town wouldn't be caught off guard. Not if Clara had anything to do with it. Not if Sheriff Klein still had strength in his bones. Because if the Hargroves were running again, someone had to finally stop them. And for that, they would need to go deeper than ever before. By the summer of 1822, whispers about New Dawn Seminary had begun to swirl through southern Illinois like wildfire on dry grass. On the surface, the school appeared impeccable. Pristine buildings, disciplined students, and a headmistress who conducted herself with polished grace. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Sheriff Klein and journalist Clara Monroe had followed their instincts to the quiet town of Carlinville, where New Dawn stood at the edge of a heavily wooded property, eerily similar to the land the old Hargrove Academy once occupied. Clara posed as a wealthy benefactor interested in writing a piece about elite education in the frontier territories. Klein remained in the shadows, watching, listening, piecing together a map of something much larger than a single school. Clara's tour of the grounds was unsettling. Everything was too perfect. The rows of girls in identical uniforms who curtsied without blinking. The tidy classrooms with empty chalkboards. The chapel with no cross, but a strange, angular symbol etched above the pulpit. A symbol that matched one she and Klein had seen carved into a stone at the Hargrove ruins. Then there was Headmistress Harrow. She greeted Clara with an unsettling calm, her voice low and melodic, but her words carefully measured. "Children flourish under structure," she said. "We don't coddle them here. We mold them." Clara asked questions. The headmistress dodged many, but one answer stood out. When Clara inquired about the school's origins, Harrow smiled faintly. "The academy is older than it seems. Its mission has remained the same across generations." That night, Clara met with Klein at a boarding house 2 towns over. She had collected more than just polite responses. In the headmistress's office, she'd spotted a shelf lined with thin red journals, identical in color and size to those once found in the Hargrove study before the fire. One bore the initials G.H., Gideon Hargrove. "They didn't just survive the fire," Clara whispered. "They rebuilt." Klein nodded grimly. "But how? Why aren't there records? No one remembers them." "Because they change names, change faces, and prey on forgotten places. This isn't just a family, it's a cult. A generational network." Their investigation grew darker. Children in neighboring towns had vanished without notice. The local coroner's logs were missing entire pages. And more disturbing still, a groundskeeper at New Dawn, an old man with clouded eyes, recognized Klein from Alton. "I know you," he rasped when they crossed paths by accident. "You were there when the fire started." Klein froze. "Who are you?" The man chuckled dryly. "Names change, but the work stays the same." He walked away before Klein could stop him. The next morning, Clara received a letter slid under her door. It was unsigned and written in a trembling hand. "They take the gifted ones, the ones with the light. They test them, break them. Not all survive. But those who do, they don't come back the same. They call it the ascension. Do not let them take any more." Suddenly it all clicked. The elite boarding schools weren't schools at all. They were hunting grounds, filters to find specific types of children. Ones with intelligence, obedience, or perhaps even sensitivity to things the Hargrove cult believed were beyond human. Clara and Klein now had a choice. Take their findings public or confront the cult directly. But Clara feared no one would believe them without proof. They needed something undeniable. Something even the most skeptical official couldn't ignore. So they returned at night. Using Clara's journalistic credentials, they accessed the seminary's chapel under the guise of a follow-up article. What they found beneath it defied all logic. Hidden beneath a trapdoor under the pulpit was a vast underground chamber, lit by oil lanterns, lined with relics of past centuries, manuscripts, ritual tools, bones arranged in ceremonial patterns, and portraits of every generation of the Hargrove family. The altar at the center bore fresh blood. Clara gasped. "They're still practicing." Klein lifted a cracked mask from a shelf. It was carved from bone, with the same angular symbol etched across the forehead. They had their proof. But they also knew this meant war. As they began photographing the scene, a voice echoed from the stairwell. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing, Ms. Monroe." Harrow. She stood at the top of the steps, not alone. Behind her, 2 large men blocked the exit, their faces emotionless. "You came here looking for the truth," she continued. "But the truth is not yours to survive." Klein raised his pistol. Clara held her breath. In that moment, they both knew they were no longer investigators. They were witnesses. And if they were going to make it out alive, they would have to survive a darkness older than either of them could imagine. The stale lantern-lit air thickened with fear. Clara could feel her pulse in her throat as Headmistress Harrow descended the chapel steps with slow, deliberate precision. Behind her, two silent guards loomed like shadows. Neither blinked nor spoke. Sheriff Klein's hand trembled slightly as he kept his pistol aimed, torn between firing and figuring out how deep this nightmare went. "You shouldn't have come here," Harrow said, voice smooth as silk soaked in venom. "This is a sacred place. The blood we spill down here is necessary." Clara stood her ground. Necessary for what? For power? For some twisted belief? No, Harrow's eyes gleamed. For survival. For continuity. Before anyone could react, a loud, metallic groan echoed from deeper, within the underground chamber. A hidden door behind the altar creaked open. From it emerged three robed figures, each wearing identical bone masks etched with that dreadful angular symbol. They moved in silence, forming a semicircle around Clara and Klein. Klein fired once into the air. "Nobody move. You're all under arrest." But no one flinched. "You don't understand, Sheriff," Harrow whispered. "This isn't something you can arrest. We are older than your laws. Older than this country. We're a lineage that goes back to the old world, to the knowledge buried before the Romans ever marched." Clara noticed it first, the glowing circle carved into the stone beneath their feet. It hummed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that made her dizzy. It wasn't just a meeting chamber, it was a ritual space. And something had already begun. Suddenly, one of the masked figures lunged forward. Klein shot, striking the figure in the shoulder, but it barely stumbled, like the pain didn't register. Clara grabbed one of the heavy lanterns and hurled it at another figure. The glass shattered, flames licking up his robe. He screamed and collapsed, writhing. That broke the illusion of silence. Everything erupted. Klein and Clara ran, dodging down a narrow passage, lit only by flickering sconces. Behind them, robed cultists gave chase. The hall twisted unnaturally, as if the building was designed to confuse, to trap. Clara could hear whispers through the walls, faint chanting in Latin or something older, less human. Just as they turned a corner, Clara spotted a side room, an old supply chamber or office. They ducked inside, barricading the door with a broken desk. Breathing hard, Clara slid to the floor. "We have to expose this. Burn it down if we have to." Klein nodded grimly. "They won't stop. This whole place is built to protect them. But if we get out of here alive, I swear I'll make sure every paper in the country knows." Clara's eyes scanned the shelves. She gasped more journals, more Hargrove ledgers, handwritten confessions, names, dates, rituals. Some were as recent as a week ago. "This is it," she whispered. "Proof. All of it." Suddenly, the door shook. Someone or something was trying to break through. "Time to go," Klein growled, grabbing the journals and kicking open a back panel of the room that led into an earthen crawlspace. They squeezed through, dragging themselves through decades of dust and bone fragments. Eventually, they emerged behind the seminary stables, breathless and filthy. Dawn was breaking. The school's silhouette stood calm against the morning sky, serene, innocent, hiding hell beneath lace and ivy. They fled Carlinville and within days reached St. Louis, where Clara published her exposé in the Missouri Sentinel. Klein presented evidence to federal marshals. An investigation was launched. But when officials returned to New Dawn Seminary, the building was empty. Every bed stripped, every book burned. The chapel gone. The underground chamber sealed with fresh concrete. The cult had vanished again. It was as if they had never existed. Epilogue. A letter from the ashes. 2 months later, Clara received a letter without a return address. "We commend your curiosity. Few survive what you saw. But know this, we are not gone. We simply shed our skin. The work continues. And the children will always come. Their light calls to us. It was signed only with the angular symbol. No name, no threat, just a warning. Sheriff Klein resigned and moved to the west, settling in the Rockies under a new name. Clara never stopped writing, but she never published another word about the Hargroves. Too many people had begun to disappear again. Investigators, readers, editors. Sometimes she would catch glimpses of familiar faces in unfamiliar cities. Former students of New Dawn, walking silently through crowds, eyes empty. The cult was still out there,